In classroom management, there's one acceptable percentage of students following a direction, 100%. Less and your authority is subject to interpretation, situation, and motivation. We're going to review the steps you can take to have the goal of 100% participation realized in your virtual classroom. So take a moment and just listen to this scenario and jot down your answer to the question. One morning, a third grade teacher wanted to address his class. He raised his hand in the practice signal for silence. Students are expected to quietly raise their hands as well. And on the morning in question, about 3/4 of the class did so, with the room becoming quiet enough for him to speak. Should he proceed? So just take a moment and write your answer to that question. And later on you can take a look at it and think about it when the presentation's over. So in schools, we spend a lot of time defining the behavior we want using the negative. Don't get distracted, stop fooling around, that behavior was inappropriate. And while they may seem very clear to us, to students, these commands are vague, inefficient, and unclear. They force them to guess what we want them to do, which of course we don't want to waste time doing that. So we're going to go through 4 specific attributes when you tell students what to do, that if you make sure they have these attributes, you're more likely to have no unclear or inefficient or vague commands in your virtual classroom. So the first one is specific. Focus on manageable and precisely described actions that students can take. So instead of saying something like, stop fooling around, we would want to describe what it is they're doing. So we wouldn't say, don't keep touching your neighbor. We'd say, keep your hands to yourself. So give them an action that they know what to do. And as we're going through this, start thinking about the things that happen in your virtual classroom that you can be more specific about the actions that students that you're wanting students to take. So specific is the first attribute. The second one is concrete. So make sure that these are actionable tasks that any student knows how to do. So, for example, instead of saying stop not using your book appropriately, you would want to say, being specific, open your book to page 20. Every student knows how to open a book, even if they are non-English speaking or they're in your classroom for the first time. That is something that you can know that every student knows how to do, and it's clear and actionable. So if you were in the room with the student, you could see them actually opening their book, and maybe it's to a particular page. So start thinking about what kind of concrete directions you can give in your virtual environment that while you're not in the room, you still expect the student to complete the task. And it's very concrete and you could see them do it. And keep in mind that with many students, there is someone sitting in the room with them when they're online. And it would be an easy enough task to ask that person to make sure the action's taken. The next one is sequential. So the third attribute is sequential. So make sure you think through the task or the actions you want students to do before, and that you give them in an order that's sequential that they can follow. My favorite example that I gave in the training was the episode of MASH where Hawkeye's trying to disassemble a bomb, and he's sitting at the bomb and he's getting directions on a walkie-talkie, and the direction is cut the green wire. And as soon as he cuts it, then the direction comes. But first, check to make sure that it's not connected to, and I don't remember what he said, but that's the joke, right? He should have been told to check before he was told to cut the wire. So make sure you've thought through the things you're asking students to do and give it to them in an order that's an appropriate sequence, that they can accomplish it easily. And the final is observable. So this one's tough, right, in our environment. So things one can plainly see them do. But I would like you to always be thinking of the student being in the room. And we need to make that communication through the virtual environment feel as palpable as if the student were in the room with us. So think about how you are going to accomplish this last attribute? Or how are you going to make what you're asking students to do observable? And if you start thinking that way, your directions are going to become much clearer, and more students are going to follow them when you ask them, even in the online environment. So those are the 4 attributes of making your actions that you ask students to do more in line and more able to get 100% participation from all your students in your room. Okay, one of the things that teachers often maybe forget to do or aren't always aware of, and that is this idea of the big picture and whittling it down to the smallest task. So these are 3 graphics that are going to help you remember how do you have an effective classroom. And it starts always, as most things do, with your strategies for success, your mission statement, your Dursals. They're called a lot of things. Okay, at Utah Virtual we call it a mission statement, and the Dursals. So these are the values and goals that we're always striving towards. This is the big goal, the big picture, the ultimate. We're not always talking about those, although I did see some of that in the classroom that I visited. But they're always in our mind. So subconsciously, we're always having those in our mind, that's really where we're trying to get the school and our students. So if you think of this graphic of this woman, and so we're going to make this analogy of driving a car. So this woman is a courteous driver. Now, she doesn't always think about that, so she doesn't get in the car and say, today I'm going to be courteous, and she doesn't put a sign up on the wall or on her car saying, everybody, I'm a courteous driver. I just wanted to let you know that. You can see it by her actions, okay? She's waving, she's looking, she's smiling. She seems like a nice person that you'd want to be driving behind. And so think of your school mission or Dursals as it's like in a car when you're a courteous driver. Not something you're always talking about, but certainly you're aware of and striving for. The next one is presumably this car is driving the speed limit. Okay, so these are the rules of your classroom. These are the things that if you do all of them, you're more likely to accomplish the mission statement or the guideline for success that we just talked about. So this is like the code of conduct or the expected behavior in the classroom. Some people call them rules, some people call them expectations, whatever you call them in your classroom. This is what you do in the class that's going to make you successful. And if we go back to our analogy of driving a car, you are a courteous driver. That's your ultimate goal. And so one of the things courteous drivers do is they follow the speed limit. So keep this graphic in mind as you're walking through this. So this is the rules. The last thing are the routines and procedures in your classroom. So this is the thing you do, and this is the passing out of papers, this is the passing out of materials, this is the turning in of assignments, all of those things that you do on a regular basis in your classroom that require information and management from you and from students. And back to our analogy of the car, this woman is adjusting her mirror, preparing to drive the speed limit, and in preparation for her ultimate goal of being a courteous driver. So you can think of routines and procedures as those things you do that are going to help you keep the rules, and they're going to help you have success in your classroom. Teachers typically spend a lot of time in the rules and talking about the rules. They don't spend as much time on routines and procedures. It's those things that drive teachers crazy in the regular classroom. So just talking about them is not good enough. We need to talk about them, and we need to talk about them again, and we need to review them every time we ask students to do them, especially this time of year because they're still learning what the routines and procedures are for the classroom. So if you find yourself sitting in your classroom saying, now remember, you have to turn in your assignment, you need to take a moment and review what that means. Because bear in mind, especially in our environment, there could be a student that's in your class for the first time. And I saw lots of chat when a teacher would say a routine or procedure and students were typing madly in the chat, what does she mean by that? How do we turn it in? Where do I go to do that? So we're even more removed, and that idea of reinforcing and reteaching routines and procedures becomes very, very important in our environment. So as you go back and start looking and reviewing your own recordings, ask yourself these questions. Am I communicating the guidelines for success, the school mission, the DURSLs? Not are you popping a slide on the screen and reading that to students or having them read it, but are you communicating what that means? Are you communicating what does it mean to be a resourceful thinker? Are you using that kind of language in your class? Okay, because there's a big difference between putting a slide up and reading it and communicating that ideal on a regular basis. Number 2, are the rules established in your classroom? It doesn't matter that you're on a virtual environment. If there are rules that you think need to be in place in that classroom, you better be communicating those, and you better be reinforcing those, and you better be correcting it when it doesn't happen. And finally, are your routines and procedures established? Have you communicated them to students? Are you constantly reviewing those with students, keeping in mind there may be a student that's in your class for the first time? So those are very critical to classroom management, and no more critical in our environment than any other environment that you may find yourself in as a teacher. So finally, the guidelines for success, or what we call at Utah Virtual, the mission statement, or the DURSLs. This is representative of what we hope students learn. Not that they come out and are able to add, although that's critical, or do algebra, or read, although those are absolutely critical. But remember, we are providing them with attitudes and actions that will help them succeed in our class, in other classes at our school, in other classes in their future, perhaps college, and in life in general. So keep in mind, that's what we're trying to create. I'm going to quickly move through this. We had some small group sessions, and we discussed different activities. But what I'd like you to do for your small group session, as you're sitting here, is take a moment and jot down a specific task that you would want students to do, okay? And then start asking yourself the question. So let's say, for example, you decided to say, I'm going to teach a rule. I'm going to teach the rule that in the Blackboard room, chat is appropriate. And I'm going to define for them what appropriate is. So chat is on topic, or chat is surrounding the subject, or chat is to the teacher only. And if you were to speak to the teacher, you would address her appropriately. So you would say, Mrs. So-and-so. Start teaching students how you want that behavior. So make sure it's specific. Number 2, is it concrete? Is it something everyone knows how to do? If it's not, teach them. Number 3, is it sequential? If there's a specific order that needs to be done, let's say related to chat, you need to first raise your hand, and then I will acknowledge you, and then you can type in the chat box. Make sure they know that. And finally, is it observable? Make it so you can see what it is you want to see, even in the virtual environment. And I know applying these very simple and things that we've already heard time and again as experienced veteran teachers and even as new teachers coming out of school, they will make your classroom successful. And please remember, just because you're virtual doesn't mean you're not effective. And these are effective practices that every teacher in the world applies. So take some time to define these for your class. Take some time to review them every time with your students, and I know you'll have classroom management success. Thank you very much. See you next time.